I'm Heidi Wong, an artist, poet, and creator, and if you've seen my TikTok, YouTube, or Instagram, you'll know I'm obsessed with horror movies. And every Monday on my new podcast from Crime House, Twisted Tales, I'll take you deep into the real-life events that inspired the world's most terrifying blockbusters, and the ones too twisted to make it to screen. Twisted Tales is a Crime House original podcast powered by Pave Studios. Watch every Monday on YouTube or listen wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello, and welcome back to In Cold Pursuit, a Disturbed true horror production. Here, we'll tell you the stories of those long forgotten, whose sudden demise are as tragic as they are intriguing. You'll learn about previously unsolved cases whose perpetrators went unknown for decades. I'm your host, Doug Bailey, and this is In Cold Pursuit. Listener discretion is advised. It was just before 6:30 a.m. on October 31st, 1966, when a groundskeeper at Riverside City College in California stumbled across something that would haunt his dreams for years. On a gravel path between two vacant houses lay the motionless form of a young woman. She was wearing a pale yellow blouse and red capri pants. Her blonde hair, lustrous and smooth in life, was now dull with dust and dried blood. Beside her was a woven straw purse containing a few coins and her ID. Her name was Sherry Jo Bates, and she was just 18 years old. The brutal murder of a young student would shock the community of Riverside, but local police dove into the murder investigation with determination. The crime scene was scoured for clues, of which there were many. First, there were Sherry's injuries. She had been stabbed repeatedly in the chest and shoulder, and had deep slash wounds across her face and neck. But it was clear that Sherry had put up an incredible fight. Evidence found on her person revealed that she had scratched her killer on the head, face, and arms, and had even torn off his watch. The paint-splattered Timex wristwatch was found about 10 feet away from Sherry's body, along with a clear shoe print in the gravel. Some 75 yards east, Sherry's beloved Volkswagen Beetle was found unlocked, the key in the ignition and the windows partly rolled down. Closer inspection showed that the ignition wiring and distributor had been deliberately pulled loose, making it impossible for Sherry to start the car. Whoever had done this had lain in wait, wanting to lure the 18-year-old girl out into the night. They'd left several smeared grease-streaked fingerprints and palm prints on the car, giving investigators something to begin with as they searched for Sherry's killer. To create a list of suspects, police looked into those closest to Sherry and delved into the details of her too short life. Originally from Omaha, Nebraska, Sherry's family had moved to California when she was 11. At Ramona High School, Sherry was an honor student and varsity cheerleader who took an active role in student government. She was kind and outgoing, with a sweet nature, so it didn't surprise anyone that she dreamed of one day becoming a flight attendant. In her spare time, she expressed her creative instincts by playing the piano and making many of her own clothes. She even liked to make things for other people. It made her happy to give away her creations to those she loved. After graduating, Sherry had enrolled at Riverside City College and picked up part-time work at a local bank. She used the money to buy a 1960 Volkswagen Beetle, its bright green paint reflecting her own cheery disposition. The week before she died, Sherry had traveled to San Francisco to visit her boyfriend of 2 years. Dennis Highland had recently transferred from RCC to San Francisco State to play football. But despite the distance, the two were still crazy about each other. About 12 hours before her body was found, Sherry had left her father a note on the refrigerator, letting him know she'd be at the RCC library studying and working on a paper. Multiple people had seen her in the library right up until it closed at 9 p.m. Joseph Bates waited for his daughter to return all night. When daybreak arrived and Sherry was nowhere to be found, he filed a missing persons report with the Riverside PD. But about 45 minutes later, the search was already over. The hunt for Sherry Jo Bates's killer, though, was just getting started. An autopsy revealed the full scale of the brutality of the attack. The killer had used a knife around 1.5 inches wide and 3.5 inches long to nearly decapitate Sherry. And that horrific violence was apparently the sole motivating factor. There was no evidence of any sexual assault or robbery. But that only confounded investigators more. Why would anyone target Sherry for such a horrific attack? It didn't make any sense. Like most of the men in her life, her boyfriend Dennis was briefly considered a suspect, but quickly ruled out. He was over 400 miles away in San Francisco on the night of the murder. As for the partial prints found on the car, they didn't turn up any matches either. Within 24 hours of the murder, police had already interviewed 75 people, including personnel stationed at a nearby Air Force base. 2 people reported that they'd briefly heard a woman's screams a little after 10 p.m. on the night of the murder, which suggested that Sherry had tried to get her car to start for some time before she was attacked. It was theorized that her killer might even have put on a charade of trying to help before luring or forcing her into a secluded space between empty houses. A month later, on November 29th, that theory was seemingly confirmed. 2 identical typed letters arrived at the Riverside PD's headquarters, as well as the office of the Riverside Press Enterprise. In them, the writer describes how he disabled Sherry's car, then watched her struggle to start it until she wore the battery down. At that point, he emerged from the shadows to offer her a ride to get help in his car, which was parked down the street. The letters seemed like they must be from the killer, because they contained details that the police never released to the public, including exactly how Sherry's car was disabled. But there was no evidence on either of the letters that police could use to trace them to their author. There was something else included, though, a motivation. The writers said that they had one thing on their mind when they attacked Sherry, making her pay for the brush-offs she had given him over the years. So if this pair of letters were from the real killer, it would appear this person knew Sherry fairly well. Still, even that didn't help investigators. And that was only the start of the baffling written evidence. Several months later, a custodian discovered a poem inscribed on the underside of a desk from the Riverside City College Library. There was little to hint at who might have written the poem and when they had done so, though the custodian said the desk had been in storage since soon after the murder. After that, months went by with little progress in the case. Then, in April of 1967, there was more communication from the potential killer. Riverside police and Sherry Jo's father received handwritten notes from an anonymous sender. The message was simple and chilling. Bates had to die. There will be more. Investigators didn't think much of these new notes. In their minds, they were nothing more than a tasteless prank, probably pulled by a teenager, and they didn't bring any answers to the still baffling case. Now that the holidays are over, you might be feeling that big spending hangover. The gifts, the food, the bills creeping in like shadows under a locked door. Luckily, Mint Mobile is here to help you cut back on overspending on wireless this January with 50% off unlimited premium wireless. And look, I'm not new to Mint. I've been a Mint Mobile user for 3 years now. Leaving the big brand cellular providers was life-changing. My bill went from a couple $100 per month for 3 lines to less than $750 for the year. The service is great, affordable, and ideal for anyone who uses a cell phone. I've been telling my family to use Mint Mobile for years. Mint Mobile's end-of-the-year sale is still going on, but only until the end of the month. Cut out Big Wireless's bloated plans with 50% off 3, 6, or 12 months of unlimited. All plans include high-speed data and unlimited talk and text on the nation's largest 5G network. This January, Mint Mobile is here to help you cut back on overspending on wireless with 50% off unlimited premium wireless. Plans starting at $15 a month at mintmobile.com/disturbed. That's mintmobile.com/disturbed. Limited time offer. Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month, $90 for 6-month, or $180 for 12-month plan required. $15 per month equivalent. Taxes and fees extra. Initial plan term only. Greater than 50 gigabytes may slow when network is busy. Capable device required. Availability, speed, and coverage varies. See mintmobile.com. When it comes to home security, you want to feel like you've picked a system that actually keeps trouble away, not one that just tells you something bad already happened. That's why I like SimpliSafe Home Security. It isn't just another alarm, it's designed to help stop crime before it starts. SimpliSafe uses AI-powered cameras outside your home to spot real threats and instantly alert live agents. And that's what makes it different from the rest. Those agents actually take action while the intruder is still outside, talking to them through the camera, letting them know they're being watched and the police are on their way. And, if needed, they can blast a siren and turn on a spotlight. I got SimpliSafe a while back and I am so happy I did. It was super easy to set up, and I'm glad to have the peace of mind that my home, belongings, and family are safe. Nothing beats that feeling. Other systems might give you a camera and a notification, but they need you to see the alert and handle it. SimpliSafe's monitoring agents have your back, even when you're busy, asleep, or on a plane. They're protecting over 5 million Americans and have been named Best Home Security Systems by U.S. and World Report for 5 years in a row. This month only, you can get 50% off any new system. It's a great time to upgrade to security that actually helps stop crime before it starts. Go to simplisafe.com/disturbed. That's simplisafe.com/disturbed. There's no safe like SimpliSafe. Welcome back, listeners. For the next 4 years, progress on the investigation was stalled. No new clues, no new suspects. Then, in March 1971, a letter was sent to the Los Angeles Times, and it would change the way people thought about Cheri Jo's murder forever. The letter began, "This is the Zodiac speaking." By this stage, the mysterious serial killer who called himself Zodiac had been linked to 5 murders in the San Francisco Bay Area. Over the years, there has been speculation about earlier Zodiac victims, but the earliest deaths confidently linked to him happened on December 20th, 1968, 2 years after Cheri Jo was killed. David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen were teenage sweethearts. He was 17, she was 16, and on the night of the 20th, David picked Betty Lou up around 8:30. They drove around Vallejo for a while, visiting a friend or two, before David took them up to Lover's Lane on Lake Herman Road. That's where they were just after 11 p.m., when a stranger parked his car alongside theirs. The man exited his car, unprovoked, and did the unthinkable. He opened fire on the teens. Betty Lou escaped out the passenger door, but the attacker shot David in the head as he tried to follow. Then he turned and chased Betty Lou down, shooting her 5 times in the back. By 11:10, the killer was gone, and a passing driver had spotted the crime scene and called the police. Much like Sherry Joe's murder, the only motive investigators seemed able to discern was that this was a madman who just wanted to kill. And like in Riverside, local investigators didn't find enough usable evidence to help them track the killer, so the case went cold very quickly. But half a year later, on July 4th, 1969, the Zodiac struck in Vallejo again. That evening, 22-year-old Darlene Ferrin picked up 19-year-old Michael Mageau for a late-night date. Darlene was well known in the area. She worked at a restaurant. Plenty of people wanted to spend time with her, and that night, Michael was the lucky guy who won her attention. Soon after Darlene picked Michael up, they noticed a man following them in a light-colored car. He tailed them all the way to a lover's lane just a couple of miles from the one where David and Betty Lou were killed. The stranger parked about 80 feet away from Darlene's car and seemed to watch them for a few minutes before suddenly driving away just after midnight. The couple only had about 5 minutes to themselves, though, before the man was back. He parked right alongside them and got out, holding a flashlight. Thinking the man was a cop, Michael rolled down his window to speak with him. That's when the man shot at them with a 9mm pistol, hitting Michael in the arm and Darlene in the neck. As the young lovers tried to get out of the car, the assailant fired 4 more times, hitting each of them twice, before getting back into his car and driving off into the night. Within minutes, a group of teens had arrived at the popular spot and found the crime scene. They immediately called for help, and police were on the scene by 12:20. Both victims were rushed to a nearby hospital, but it was too late for Darlene. Michael, however, survived and was able to give the cops a description of their attacker. He recalled the man being heavy-set and standing around 5'8". He had light brown, curly hair and wore dark clothing. It wasn't much to go on, but it was better than nothing. Then, just as investigators were gearing up for the search, a call came into the Vallejo PD just around 12:40 a.m. The caller said he was reporting a double murder, then proceeded to give the location of Michael and Darlene, the color of their car, and the weapon he used to shoot them. Before he hung up, the man also claimed responsibility for killing David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen. Unfortunately, the man offered no clues about his identity or his motivation. Investigators didn't have to wait long, though. Less than a month later, on August 1st, 3 Bay Area newspapers received nearly identical letters from a man claiming responsibility for the 2 Vallejo attacks. The notes each contained a different cryptogram, along with the demand that they be printed in the newspapers. If the publishers refused, the author promised to spend the weekend killing people out walking alone until he'd killed a round dozen. The cryptograms combined to form a cipher made up of 408 symbols. That cipher was the killer's identity, he wrote. The writer then signed off using a symbol that looked like the crosshairs of a gun. After examining the letters, Vallejo's police chief requested more details from the writer to prove he was actually the killer. 2 days later, another letter arrived. This time, he gave himself a name, the Zodiac. He then went on to give previously secret details about the attacks and made it undeniable. He was the person responsible for them both. He also assured investigators that when his cipher was decoded, they would know who he was. By that stage, both the FBI and CIA had agents working to decrypt the cipher, but both agencies were beaten to it. Amateur puzzle solvers and married couple Donald and Betty Hardin found the solution first. When the full message was revealed, though, it didn't unmask the Zodiac as he promised it would. The most revealing insight was his motivation. The Zodiac wrote that he found killing humans the most thrilling experience there was, and that doing so allowed him to collect slaves for the afterlife. The arrogant letters from the Zodiac were chilling to read, and though they helped investigators better understand what drove him, they brought police no closer to finding and stopping him. No one knew if or when the killer would strike again. Unfortunately, they wouldn't have to wait for long. He would make his move before the end of the summer. On the afternoon of September 27, 1969, Pacific Union College students Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard were enjoying a picnic beside Lake Berryessa, some 50 miles north of Vallejo. 22-year-old Cecilia noticed that there was a man who seemed to be watching them from beyond a nearby tree. Just as she was remarking on it to Brian, the man walked into the open, pulling a black executioner's hood over his head. Clip-on sunglasses obscured his face, and a bib hung around his neck with a white crosshair symbol. Aiming a gun at them, the Zodiac made Cecilia tie up 20-year-old Brian with lengths of plastic clothesline. Then he himself tied up Cecilia before producing a knife and stabbing both students several times and making his escape. On the way back to the road, the Zodiac left several footprints in the dirt and used a black marker to scrawl a message on Brian's car door. At the top, he drew his calling card symbol, followed by Vallejo, the dates of his 2 earlier attacks, and then that day's date, and the words, "by knife." It was a tally of all his crimes so far, at least the ones he'd claimed. His message left for all the world to see. The Zodiac got into his car and fled the scene. He drove nearly 30 miles to downtown Napa, where he used a payphone at a car wash to call Napa County's Sheriff's Department to report a double murder. Then, after giving details of the crime, he left the receiver dangling from its cord and fled. But the Zodiac was wrong. He hadn't committed another double murder. Given that Berryessa was a public lake and the attack occurred in broad daylight, there were people nearby who heard Brian and Cecilia scream and ran for help. By the time park rangers arrived a few minutes later, Brian had already untied Cecilia using his teeth, and she helped him get free too. While they waited for paramedics to arrive, Cecilia bravely described the man who attacked them. Those words were some of the last she said. She fell into a coma en route to a nearby hospital and never woke up. 2 days later, she was dead. Brian survived his injuries, and he was able to give an account of what happened. Additionally, several witnesses came forward to report that they were at Lake Berryessa on the day of the attack and noticed a strange man lurking in the area. 3 women helped an artist create a composite sketch of the man they'd seen watching them. Everyone's descriptions of the man's height and body type matched the details Cecilia had given before she died, and that Brian continued repeating. The man stood around 6 feet tall and was somewhat heavy-set, probably around 200 pounds. But as with the Zodiac's earlier crimes, there wasn't enough detail for investigators to name any suspects. Even when they were able to pull a wet palm print from the payphone he used to call in the attack, they couldn't find a match in their system. And so the Zodiac was free to strike again. It was only 2 weeks after the Lake Berryessa attacks when the Zodiac claimed another victim. That night, doctoral student and cab driver Paul Stine was on duty in downtown San Francisco. Around 9:40 p.m., he picked up a man who asked to be driven to the city's Presidio Heights neighborhood. 15 minutes later, Paul brought the taxi to a stop at the corner of Washington and Cherry Street. But instead of paying his fare, the Zodiac pulled out a handgun and shot Paul in the head, then leaned forward to take his wallet and keys. Unbeknownst to the killer, 3 teenagers were watching all of this unfold from their house across the street. They saw the killer search Paul's clothes for valuables, then wipe down the car interior. When he got out to leave, they got a clear look at his face in the streetlight. They didn't hesitate to call the SFPD to tell them what they'd seen, describing the killer as a husky white man wearing a dark or black jacket. Unfortunately, the dispatcher made a mistake when they sent out an alert to cops in the area. They told officers that the suspect they were looking for was black, not his clothes. Just 2 minutes later, a pair of patrol officers noticed a white man in dark clothes and stopped him to ask if he'd noticed anything strange or suspicious in the area. The man, later confirmed to be the Zodiac, told them he'd seen a man waving a gun and heading east. The officers thanked him and were on their way, in pursuit of an imaginary armed man. The Zodiac then found a discreet place to wait and watched police search the neighborhood. By the time SFPD arrived at Paul Stine's car, the 29-year-old was dead, and 2 days later, the Zodiac claimed responsibility for the murder in another letter sent to the San Francisco Chronicle. He included a piece of Paul's bloody shirt in the envelope to verify his confession, and taunted the police for failing to catch him when he was so close by. Realizing that they had several new witnesses who got good looks at the Zodiac, investigators worked with the 3 teenagers who called in the murder, as well as the patrol officers who spoke with him to create a sketch of the suspect. Their descriptions and the sketch all resembled other accounts of the man people had seen nearby the other Zodiac crime scenes. Wanted posters bearing the sketch and a description were distributed throughout Northern California. The flyers advertised that the man was wanted for murder, but didn't outright link him to the Zodiac case. However, the posters didn't lead to any new breakthroughs, and over the coming months, the Zodiac kept up his correspondence with the local press, making threats to target a school bus for a future attack. All through 1970, the killer continued sending cryptic letters and greeting cards to both the press and the authorities, taunting them for not catching him, and including yet more ciphers to decrypt. "Don't run away. Disturbed will return in a moment." A new year and colder days mean your winter wardrobe really has to deliver. If you're craving a reset, start with pieces built to last. Because nothing's scarier than stepping into the cold only to realize that your coat has the structural integrity of a haunted house. Quince brings together premium materials and lasting quality so you stay warm, look sharp, and feel your best. Quince has everything: Mongolian cashmere sweaters, wool coats, leather outerwear, and beyond the wardrobe, my most recent purchase was a set of bed sheets that have totally changed the quality of my sleep. Quince is quality, affordable, and every piece I've ordered, from joggers to sheets, is comfortable. Their outerwear is especially impressive. Each piece is made from premium materials by trusted factories without luxury markups, classic styles that hold up year after year. Refresh your winter wardrobe with Quince. Go to quince.com/disturbed for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. Now available in Canada too. That's QUINCE.com/disturbed. Free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/disturbed.
At twisted new season of The Traitors is finally here.
What did I get myself into?
The prize, $250,000.
I'm gonna lie and cheat and do whatever I have to do to win.
If you're gonna come for me, I'll finish you.
Shame on you!
I'm out for blood.
It is like a firing squad. Boom, 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 boom.
Let the games begin. Emmy Award winner, The Traitors. New episode streaming Thursdays at 9 p.m. Eastern, only on Peacock.
By October 1970, it had been 4 years since the murder of Cheri Jo Bates, and 430 miles south of San Francisco, Riverside police were no closer to solving the crime. That's when San Francisco Chronicle journalist Paul Avery received an anonymous letter pointing out the similarities between Cheri's murder and the Zodiac's confirmed crimes. Riverside PD had themselves contacted Bay Area investigators about the parallels a year earlier, wondering if there was a connection. But Paul Avery was the one who first made the idea public. 5 months later, the Zodiac sent a letter to the Los Angeles Times, congratulating police for finally figuring out that he had been active in Riverside, though he pointed out that they had only found the quote-unquote easy ones. He also wrote that he claimed 14 victims by this stage, though he had only claimed 5 by name. It was here, 4.5 years after the fact, that people wondered whether they finally had an answer to the tragic murder of Cheri Jo Bates. Was she one of the Zodiac's earliest victims? Maybe his first? Was the killer who terrorized the Bay Area the author of the poem found on the library desk? A handwriting expert examined the desk poem, the handwritten note sent to Cheri's father, and the Zodiac letters, and concluded that all of them were written by the same person. But investigators at Riverside PD were skeptical. Earlier, they thought the similarities were striking enough to bring them to the attention of their Bay Area colleagues. But since then, their stance had changed. To their minds, Cheri's killer was a native of the area, and likely someone she knew personally, a man whose advances she rejected perhaps. They didn't buy that this same man would have gone on to target multiple people throughout the state. Still, the similarities between her case and the Zodiac's crimes were enough to give anyone pause. The brutal, seemingly random violence, the lack of clear motive other than the thrill of the kill, the communication with the press after the fact, and then there was the fact that the Zodiac himself seemed to claim responsibility for the crime in 1971. The theory remained a popular one over the decades. Some 50 years after the murder, a group of retired cops, intelligence officers, and journalists came together to go over all of the available evidence in relation to Cheri's death, calling themselves the Case Breakers. The group worked on other famous cold cases, including the disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa and the Atlanta child murders. In 2021, they announced that they had identified Cheri Bates' killer and were confident that he was also the Zodiac. The man they named was Gary Francis Post, a painter and Air Force veteran. When he was 20, Gary was injured in a serious car crash that left him with distinctive scars on his forehead. Those scars seemed to match the marks on the police sketch of the Zodiac. But it wasn't just that. They also had circumstantial evidence that hinted at Post being the potential owner of the watch Cheri ripped from her killer's wrist. But the team reported that Riverside PD refused their request to test DNA evidence from Cheri's crime scene against samples from Post's clothing and a relative. Riverside PD have said that they received no such request for testing. But the Case Breakers had more in their arsenal. They also linked Post to Donna Lass, a woman who, like Sherry Bates, was suspected of being a Zodiac victim. On September 5th, 1970, 25-year-old Donna rented a new apartment in South Lake Tahoe. Sadly, she'd never get the chance to move in. The next day, she left a late shift at the casino where she was a first aid nurse. She was never seen again. On the 7th, a man called the casino to tell Donna's boss that she had a family emergency and wouldn't be in to work that day. That phone call was the last clue anyone had to Donna's whereabouts. Before long, the case was frustratingly cold. 6 months later, a postcard arrived at the San Francisco Chronicle, the Zodiac's favorite newspaper. The note was cryptic in nature and bore a symbol resembling one the killer used to sign his communications, as well as what appeared to be directions to the location of a victim, hidden somewhere in Lake Tahoe. Right away, people connected the dots, believing that the postcard was about Donna. But even if it was, there was little else to work with. At that stage, no one could even be sure that Donna was dead. 15 years later, a fisherman stumbled upon partial human remains buried in the snow in California's Sierra Nevada mountains, 45 miles northwest of South Lake Tahoe. Because it was the 1980s, DNA testing wasn't available to help investigators identify the remains. That development had to wait until 2023, when a newly formed cold case unit used DNA from Donna's sister to confirm that it was her. That was one part of the mystery solved. But where the rest of Donna's remains were, and who was responsible for her death, were questions that were still unanswered. According to them, an eyewitness saw Donna with Gary Post the night she disappeared. But it seemed that person never mentioned this during the initial investigation. Of course, Donna Lass wasn't the only woman the casebreakers tied to Post. After speaking to people who knew him when he was alive, they pinned him for all of the Zodiac cases, including plenty that have never been conclusively tied to the case. In his final confirmed communication with the public in 1974, the Zodiac claimed he had killed 37 victims. Some believe his ledger may have been even higher. Though, to date, investigators have only confirmed he was responsible for 5 murders: teenagers David Arthur Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen, Darlene Elizabeth Farron, Cecilia Ann Shepard, and Paul Lee Stein. So where does that leave the story of Sherry Jo Bates, the kind, generous freshman who was cut down in her prime? Sadly, the investigation into her murder is officially still ongoing. But despite how many unanswered questions there are in the case, Riverside PD are adamant of one thing: her murder was not at the hands of the Zodiac killer. But if the Zodiac didn't kill Sherry, then who did? In 2016, the Press Enterprise reported that Riverside PD have a suspect they strongly believe is the killer, but they have never had enough evidence to make an arrest. The most recent investigator assigned to the case, Detective Jim Simons, has publicly stated that there is one individual who is of interest. This person was living out of the country for many years, but upon his return to California, investigators obtained a warrant to collect a DNA sample. It didn't match any of the DNA samples found at the scene, which would appear to rule this person out. But Detective Simons has been hesitant to remove him from the suspect list. Whatever it is that makes the police believe this person killed Sherry, it's damning enough to make them look past DNA evidence. As for the written communications received in the weeks and months after the murder, the author of at least one of those made himself known to police. In 2016, a man contacted police to admit to being the author of the short handwritten notes that claimed Bates had to die. There will be more. He'd been a troubled teenager when he wrote the letters, and his cruel hoax had been haunting him for decades. 4 years later, in 2020, investigators confirmed the man's story through DNA evidence taken from the notes. That single development eroded some of the evidence people point to as proof that Sherry was one of the Zodiac's earliest victims. At least one handwriting expert had claimed the note was written by the same hand as the one that wrote the Zodiac's other letters. Now that belief was no longer credible. And with every passing year, it will only become harder to find usable evidence linking Sherry's murder to one person, whether their identity is known or not. Sherry Jo Bates's family seemed to know that, and perhaps sensing they might never get the closure they hoped for. In 1997, they established a memorial scholarship at Riverside City College. It's awarded each year to a student with a music major who participates in school projects and athletic activities, and who performs volunteer work for the community. It's a fitting tribute for a young woman who brightened the lives of people around her, and whose murder remains tragically unsolved 6 decades later. Thank you for joining us for another episode of In Cold Pursuit, a production of the Disturbed True Horror team at Killer Podcasts. I'm your host, Doug Bailey. This episode was written by Joel Callan. Our producer and editor is Declan Roars, and our audio engineer is Nathan Corson. Listen to our episodes early and ad-free at patreon.com/disturbedpodcast. And hey, stay safe out there.